There are moments in history where events are carefully recorded, evidence survives, witnesses exist, and yet the reason behind what happened is still missing. Across these chapters, you'll encounter disappearances, unexplained behaviors, ancient knowledge, and decisions that seem irrational even when all the facts are laid out. These are not legends or ghost stories, but real cases where historians, scientists, and investigators reached the edge of explanation and had to stop. Wherever you're watching from, and whatever time it is, comment now. This is a journey into the parts of human history that refuse to settle into simple answers. Let's begin. The lost city of Akkad. In the ancient Near East, long before Rome, long before classical Greece, and even before many of the cities whose ruins we still walk through today, there existed a city so powerful that it gave its name to the first true empire in human history. This city was Akkad. It was the political, military, and administrative heart of an empire that reshaped the ancient world, unified vast territories under a single ruler, and introduced ideas of governance that would influence civilizations for centuries. And yet, despite its importance, Akkad has never been found. Unlike Troy, Nineveh, or Babylon, Akkad doesn't sit in ruins waiting to be excavated. Its temples, walls, and streets have never been identified with certainty. No archaeologist can point to a mound and say, without hesitation, this is the city that once ruled Mesopotamia. Akkad exists clearly in texts, inscriptions, and historical memory, but not on the ground. This absence is one of the greatest mysteries in archaeology. The city of Akkad rose to prominence around 2300 BCE under the rule of Sargon of Akkad, a figure who transformed scattered city-states into a centralized empire stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. Before Sargon, Mesopotamia was divided among competing cities like Ur, Uruk, and Lagash, each guarding its independence. Sargon changed this balance through conquest, administration, and the deliberate use of Akkad as a new kind of capital, one that was not bound to older religious hierarchies or local traditions. Akkad was not simply another city. It was an idea made physical. It represented imperial authority rather than regional identity. This may explain why it was so influential, and also why it became so vulnerable. Cuneiform texts describe Akkad as wealthy, powerful, and central to trade networks that moved goods across Mesopotamia and beyond. The Akkadian language replaced Sumerian as the dominant administrative language, a shift so significant that Akkadian would continue to be used for centuries, even after the empire fell. Kings after Sargon styled themselves as rulers of Akkad, long after the city itself may have declined, showing how deeply its symbolic power endured. And yet, when modern archaeology began uncovering Mesopotamian cities in the 19th and 20th centuries, Akkad was missing. Scholars have searched for it across central and northern Iraq, focusing on regions along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where ancient cities often clustered. Some have suggested Akkad lay near modern Baghdad, others propose locations farther north or east. Each proposal is based on textual clues, distances mentioned in inscriptions, or proximity to known cities. None have been confirmed. One reason Akkad may be so difficult to find is environmental change. Over thousands of years, the rivers of Mesopotamia shifted their courses dramatically. Cities that once lay on riverbanks may now be buried beneath floodplains, silt, or even modern cities. If Akkad was located in such a zone, it may be deeply buried, inaccessible, or destroyed by later construction. Another possibility is deliberate erasure. The Akkadian Empire did not last long. After a period of expansion and consolidation, it collapsed under a combination of internal instability, rebellion, and environmental stress. Later Mesopotamian texts speak of famine, drought, and social breakdown during this period. Some describe Akkad as cursed, abandoned by the gods, and left in ruin. While these accounts are shaped by ideology, they hint at a catastrophic decline. If Akkad fell rapidly and was abandoned rather than rebuilt, it may not have accumulated the long layers of occupation that make other cities easier to detect archaeologically. Cities like Babylon survived for millennia, rebuilt again and again. Akkad may not have had that chance. There is also the uncomfortable possibility that we have already found Akkad, but failed to recognize it. Without inscriptions explicitly naming the city, identifying Akkad relies on context, scale, and association. Many ancient sites remain only partially excavated. Some lie beneath modern settlements where digging is impossible. Others were excavated early, before modern methods could detect subtle clues. From a human perspective, the loss of Akkad is unsettling, because it shows how even the most powerful centers of authority can disappear so completely that their physical presence is erased. This was not a minor city. It was the capital of an empire that reshaped history. Its rulers were remembered. Its language survived. Its city did not. The mystery deepens when we consider how often Akkad appears in later texts. Babylonian and Assyrian kings invoked Akkad as a symbol of legitimacy. They claimed continuity with its rulers. The city became an idea rather than a place, a reference point for imperial ambition even after its location was forgotten. This transformation from physical city to symbolic memory may have sealed its fate. Once Akkad existed more powerfully as an idea, the need to preserve or rebuild the original site diminished. Its meaning survived without its walls. Modern technology has not yet solved this mystery. Satellite imagery, ground surveys, and textual analysis have narrowed the search, but not delivered certainty. Political instability in the region has further limited excavation, leaving large areas unexplored. The lost city of Akkad remains one of archaeology's most striking absences. It is known in detail through words, yet invisible in the earth. It ruled through force and administration, yet left no confirmed footprint that can be visited today. Akkad stands as a reminder that history is not preserved evenly. Power does not guarantee permanence. Cities can dominate entire regions. Cahokia's sudden collapse. Near the Mississippi River, just east of what is now St. Louis, there was once a city so large, so organized, and so influential that it reshapes how we understand North American history the moment we take it seriously. This city was Cahokia. At its height, around the year 1100 CE, it was the largest urban center north of Mexico, home to tens of thousands of people, dominated by monumental earthworks, ceremonial plazas, and a social structure that extended far beyond its immediate landscape. And then within a relatively short span of time, Cahokia declined and was abandoned, leaving behind no written explanation and no clear single cause. For a long time, Cahokia was misunderstood or ignored. Early European settlers saw its massive earthen mounds, but did not recognize them as the remains of a city. Some assumed they were natural hills. Others attributed them vaguely to lost tribes without further curiosity. It was only through modern archaeology that the scale of Cahokia became clear. At its peak, Cahokia covered more than 6 square miles. At its center stood Monk's Mound, the largest earthen structure in the Americas, taller than the Great Pyramid of Giza's base footprint and requiring millions of cubic meters of earth to construct. Around it lay dozens of other mounds, arranged with deliberate spacing, large open plazas, wooden structures, and astronomical markers such as the so-called woodhenge, a circular arrangement of timber posts aligned with solar events. This was not a loose settlement. It was a planned city. Cahokia supported a dense population through intensive agriculture, particularly maize cultivation, supplemented by hunting, fishing, and trade. Artifacts found at the site show long-distance exchange networks reaching the Great Lakes, the Gulf Coast, and the Appalachian Mountains. Materials such as copper, shells, and stone moved through Cahokia, suggesting it functioned as both a religious and economic center. The social organization implied by this system is significant. Monumental construction requires leadership, coordination, and shared ideology. Cahokia's elites likely held both political and spiritual authority, reinforced through ritual, symbolism, and control of labor. The city's layout reflects hierarchy, with elevated mounds serving as platforms for important structures and activities. And yet, by around 1350 CE, Cahokia was largely empty. The collapse does not appear to have been caused by a single catastrophic event. There is no evidence of foreign invasion on a scale that would explain total abandonment. No widespread burn layers suggest sudden destruction. Instead, the city seems to have unraveled gradually, though decisively. Environmental stress is one of the leading explanations. Cahokia's growth placed enormous pressure on local ecosystems. Forests were cleared extensively for agriculture, construction, and fuel. This deforestation likely increased erosion, reduced soil fertility, and altered local water systems. Archaeological evidence suggests flooding became more frequent, damaging crops and infrastructure. At the same time, reliance on maize as a staple food may have weakened overall nutrition. Skeletal remains show signs of stress, disease, and malnutrition increasing in later periods. As population density rose, sanitation challenges would have intensified, creating conditions favorable to illness. Climate change may have amplified these problems. The period coincides with the onset of the Little Ice Age, which brought cooler temperatures and unpredictable weather patterns. Shorter growing seasons and failed harvests would have strained food systems already operating near their limits. Social factors likely played an equally important role. Evidence suggests rising inequality toward the end of Cahokia's occupation. Burial practices became more differentiated, indicating that power and resources were increasingly concentrated among elites. At the same time, signs of violence appear more frequently in skeletal remains, including trauma consistent with conflict. This does not point to organized warfare so much as internal tension. When belief systems fail to deliver stability, legitimacy erodes. Cahokia's power rested heavily on ritual authority. If environmental disasters or social unrest undermined confidence in leadership, the ideological foundation of the city could have collapsed rapidly. Without belief binding the population together, the immense effort required to maintain urban life would no longer make sense. Another key point is migration. People did not simply vanish. Archaeological evidence shows populations moving away from Cahokia into surrounding regions, forming new communities that carried aspects of Mississippian culture with them. The collapse was not an end of a people, but the end of a center. This pattern mirrors other ancient collapses. Cities fail not because humans disappear, but because staying becomes less viable than leaving. From a human perspective, Cahokia's collapse is unsettling because it reveals how advanced and fragile complex societies can be. This was not a marginal settlement. It was a metropolis by medieval standards, thriving at the same time as major cities in Europe and Asia. Its disappearance was not recorded in writing, not commemorated in legend, and not preserved in collective memory beyond the region. It simply emptied. Modern urban landscapes now surround Cahokia. Highways, suburbs, and industrial zones exist within sight of Monk's Mound. Millions of people pass nearby without realizing that they are moving through the shadow of a city that once rivaled the greatest centers of its age. Cahokia stands as a powerful reminder that urban success does not guarantee permanence. Even cities that master agriculture, trade, and monumental construction can unravel when environmental stress, social inequality, and ideological breakdown converge. Cahokia did not fall in flames. It did not fall to invaders. It faded as people chose survival over centralization, leaving behind earthworks that still rise quietly from the ground, marking the place where North America's greatest pre-Columbian city once stood, and asking us to consider how easily even the most impressive human systems can come undone when balance is lost. The Dancing Plague of 1518. In the summer of 1518, in the city of Strasbourg, then part of the Holy Roman Empire, something began that no one could explain and no one could control. It did not arrive with soldiers, disease, or natural disaster. It began quietly, with a single woman stepping into the street and dancing. She did not dance for celebration or ritual. She danced because, according to witnesses, she could not stop. Her name was Frau Trophäa. She danced for hours, then for days. Her movements were uncontrolled, repetitive, and exhausting. Neighbors assumed it would pass. It did not. Instead, something far more disturbing happened. Others began to join her, not out of imitation or joy, but because they too felt compelled to move. Within weeks, dozens of people were dancing in the streets. Within a month, the number had grown into the hundreds. This was not performance. It was compulsion. Contemporary records describe people dancing until their feet bled, until their muscles gave out, until they collapsed from exhaustion. Some reportedly suffered heart attacks, strokes, or fatal dehydration. Priests, physicians, and city officials were summoned, but none could agree on what they were witnessing. The city's response, in hindsight, only deepened the crisis. Authorities believed the dancers were afflicted by an imbalance of bodily humors, a medical concept dominant at the time. According to this theory, the only cure was to allow the afflicted to dance it out. Musicians were hired, dance halls were opened, platforms were built in public squares to accommodate the growing crowds. Instead of stopping the plague, it spread. More people joined. More bodies failed. The city was caught between compassion and confusion, treating a condition they did not understand with methods that may have intensified it. Religious explanations followed quickly. Some believed the dancers were cursed by Saint Vitus, a figure associated with involuntary movement and punishment. Others believed demonic possession was at work. Pilgrimages were organized, prayers were offered, none brought relief. Eventually, the strategy shifted. The dancers were removed from the city and taken to shrines outside Strasbourg. There they were subjected to rituals, blessings, and isolation. Slowly, the dancing stopped. By late summer, the plague had faded. What remains is the question of what truly happened. There's no evidence of infectious disease in the modern sense. No pathogen has been identified. No similar outbreak occurred in nearby regions at the same scale. The episode was localized, intense, and socially contagious. One proposed explanation is ergot poisoning, caused by a fungus that grows on rye and can induce hallucinations and convulsions. While ergotism can produce involuntary movement, it does not convincingly explain the prolonged, coordinated dancing seen in Strasbourg, nor the apparent psychological synchronization among participants. Another explanation points toward mass psychogenic illness. Strasbourg in 1518 was under severe stress. The region had suffered famine, disease, and economic hardship. Fear and anxiety were widespread. In such conditions, psychological distress can manifest physically, especially within tightly knit communities that share beliefs and expectations. This does not mean the suffering was imagined. The pain was real. The exhaustion was real. The deaths were real. What may have spread was not a pathogen, but an idea combined with unbearable stress, reinforced by authority figures who unintentionally validated the behavior. The dancing plague forces an uncomfortable recognition. Human bodies do not operate independently of social context. Under extreme pressure, the boundary between mind and body can dissolve in ways that defy rational explanation. From a human perspective, this event is unsettling because it resists categorization. It was not purely medical. It was not purely religious. It was not deliberate. It sat at the intersection of belief, stress, and physiology. The people of Strasbourg did not choose to dance. They were compelled by something no one could name. Modern science offers frameworks, but no definitive answer. The dancing plague remains a historical event with documentation, eyewitness accounts, and fatalities, yet without a diagnosis that fully satisfies. The dancing plague of 1518 stands as a reminder that not all crises come from external forces. Some arise from within societies under strain, where fear, belief, and human vulnerability combine into phenomena that feel supernatural only because they reveal how little control people sometimes have over their own bodies. The music stopped, the streets emptied, but the question remains, not of why they danced, but of what conditions can push ordinary people beyond conscious control, reminding us that history is not only shaped by wars and inventions, but also by moments when human behavior itself becomes the mystery. Tartessos, the lost civilization at the edge of the ancient world. In the far western reaches of the ancient Mediterranean world, beyond the familiar centers of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Aegean, Greek writers spoke of a land of extraordinary wealth, advanced knowledge, and powerful kings. This place was called Tartessos. It was described as a flourishing civilization rich in metals, trade, and culture, located somewhere in what is now southern Spain. And yet, like Akkad, Tartessos occupies an uneasy space between historical record and archaeological absence. It is known clearly in ancient texts, but its physical reality remains elusive. Tartessos appears in Greek sources as early as the 8th century BCE. Writers such as Herodotus describe it as a wealthy kingdom beyond the Pillars of Hercules, a place that traded with Phoenicians and Greeks and possessed abundant silver, copper, and tin. Its king, Argentonios, is said to have ruled for an exceptionally long time, welcoming Greek merchants and supporting them financially. These accounts do not read like myths. They are specific, geographic, and embedded in otherwise reliable historical narratives. What makes Tartessos difficult to dismiss is that the region described matches a real area known for metal wealth. The lower Guadalquivir River basin in Andalusia contains some of the richest mineral deposits in ancient Europe. Archaeological evidence confirms extensive mining activity in the Bronze and Iron Ages, as well as strong Phoenician presence along the southern Iberian coast. Trade clearly existed. Wealth was real. The question is not whether something was there, but what form it took. Unlike later Iberian cultures, Tartessos left no inscriptions that clearly identify its language or political structure. There is no city universally accepted as its capital. Some scholars propose that Tartessos was centered near the ancient mouth of the Guadalquivir River, possibly beneath modern wetlands or alluvial deposits that have shifted dramatically over time. If this is true, the city may now lie buried under meters of sediment, hidden in an environment hostile to excavation. Environmental change is a critical factor in this mystery. Over the past 3,000 years, the Guadalquivir Delta has transformed significantly. Coastlines moved, rivers changed course, and low-lying settlements were flooded or buried. A city built near water for trade and transport may have been slowly erased by the very geography that made it prosperous. Another complication is that Tartessos may not have been a single city at all. Some researchers argue that it was a regional culture or network of settlements, rather than a centralized kingdom. Greek writers, encountering this system through trade, may have simplified it into a single-named entity, as was common in ancient ethnography. In this view, Tartessos was real, but not urbanized in the way later civilizations were. Yet this interpretation does not fully explain the consistency of ancient accounts describing kingship, wealth, and longevity. The sudden disappearance of Tartessos from historical records is equally puzzling. By the 6th century BCE, references to Tartessos vanish. Greek writers stop mentioning it. Phoenician influence in the region declines. Something changed dramatically, but without surviving records, the nature of that change remains uncertain. One possibility is political disruption. The expansion of Carthage in the Western Mediterranean may have altered trade networks and power balances, marginalizing or absorbing Tartessian centers. Another possibility is environmental catastrophe, such as flooding or seismic activity, that rendered key settlements uninhabitable. There's also the theory of cultural transformation. Tartessos may not have collapsed violently, but evolved into later Iberian cultures, losing its distinct identity as populations mixed and political structures changed. In this case, Tartessos did not vanish, but dissolved. From a human perspective, Tartessos is unsettling because it occupies a rare position. It is neither purely mythical nor securely archaeological. It exists in the space between credible historical testimony and physical silence. This makes it resistant to simple classification. Dismissing it as legend ignores the reliability of the sources. Accepting it fully requires evidence that has not yet been found. Modern archaeology continues to search for Tartessos using satellite imagery, geomagnetic surveys, and underwater exploration in coastal and riverine environments. Each new discovery of Iberian and Phoenician material adds context, but not confirmation. The outline becomes clearer, but the center remains missing. What Tartessos represents more broadly is a reminder that the ancient world extended far beyond the regions we traditionally emphasize. Wealth, innovation, and complex society did not belong exclusively to the Eastern Mediterranean or Near East. They also emerged at the fringes, shaped by trade, geography, and opportunity. Tartessos remains a civilization defined as much by absence as by memory. It is known through the words of outsiders, remembered for its riches, and yet still unlocated with certainty. Somewhere beneath fields, marshes, or riverbeds, the material remains of Tartessos may still exist, or they may have been scattered beyond recognition. The Greeks remembered it, the land hides it, and between those two facts lies a civilization that once stood at the edge of the known world, prosperous enough to be famous, and fragile enough to disappear so completely that even its name now marks a question rather than a place. The Minoan civilization and its sudden end. Long before classical Greece, before Athens and Sparta shaped Western imagination, a powerful and sophisticated civilization flourished on the island of Crete. Known today as the Minoans, this society dominated the Aegean Sea for centuries through trade, art, and maritime skill. Their cities were vibrant, their culture distinctive, and their influence widespread. And then, without a clear moment of defeat or a single identifiable cause, the Minoan world unraveled. The Minoan civilization emerged around 3000 BCE and reached its height between 2000 and 1450 BCE. Centered on large palace complexes such as Knossos, Phaistos, and Malea, Minoan society displayed an advanced level of organization. These palaces were not fortified strongholds. They lacked defensive walls, suggesting a confidence rooted in naval power rather than land-based warfare. The sea was their protection. Minoan art reveals a society deeply connected to nature and movement. Frescoes depict dolphins, lilies, festivals, and athletes leaping over bulls. Unlike later Greek art, there is little emphasis on war or conquest. The imagery suggests ritual, ceremony, and daily life rather than domination. This cultural tone sets the Minoans apart from many contemporaries. Economically, the Minoans were deeply embedded in Mediterranean trade networks. Goods flowed between Crete, Egypt, Anatolia, and the Levant. Pottery, metals, textiles, and agricultural products moved through Minoan ports, making the island a hub of exchange. Their ships carried not only goods, but ideas, styles, and technologies. This prosperity depended on stability. The first major disruption came in the form of natural disaster. Around 1600 BCE, the volcanic island of Thera, modern-day Santorini, erupted in one of the most powerful volcanic events in human history. The explosion sent ash across the Aegean, triggered massive tsunamis, and altered regional climate patterns. Coastal settlements were damaged or destroyed. Agricultural cycles were disrupted. For a long time, this eruption was thought to be the singular cause of Minoan collapse. Modern evidence suggests the situation was more complex. While the eruption was devastating, it did not immediately destroy Minoan society. Palaces were rebuilt. Trade continued. Life adapted. This resilience complicates the idea of sudden annihilation and forces us to look beyond catastrophe alone. What followed appears to be a gradual weakening rather than instant collapse. Archaeological layers show repeated destruction at palace sites after the eruption, possibly from earthquakes, fires, or internal conflict. Around 1450 BCE, many Minoan centers were destroyed and not rebuilt. Knossos survived longer than others, but its character changed. New styles of pottery, burial practices, and administrative records appear, suggesting outside influence. This is where the Mycenaeans enter the story. Mainland Greek societies, known as the Mycenaeans, had long interacted with Crete through trade. As Minoan power weakened, Mycenaean presence increased. Linear B tablets found at Knossos show that Greek was being used for administration, replacing the undeciphered Minoan script known as Linear A. This marks a profound cultural shift. The key question is whether this transition was violent or opportunistic. There is limited evidence of large-scale invasion. No clear battlefield remains. No mass graves point to conquest. Instead, the change may have been political, economic, or elite-driven. Control may have shifted through influence, intermarriage, or internal collapse rather than war. Another factor to consider is systemic fragility. Minoan society was highly centralized around palaces that controlled storage, redistribution, and administration. When these centers failed, the system had little redundancy. A combination of environmental stress, disrupted trade, and political instability could have caused the entire structure to fail. This pattern mirrors other collapses in ancient history. By around 1200 BCE, the distinct Minoan culture had effectively disappeared. Elements survived within Mycenaean Greece, but the identity that once defined Crete was gone. The language vanished, the art style faded, the palaces were no longer rebuilt in their original form. What remains today is not a dramatic ruin of conquest, but traces of a civilization that dissolved. From a human perspective, the Minoan collapse is unsettling because it shows how a society built on connectivity and balance can unravel when multiple pressures converge. There was no single enemy to blame, no final battle to mark the end. The civilization simply lost coherence. The sea that once protected them became unpredictable. The networks that sustained them fractured. The institutions that organized them failed. As this chapter closes, the Minoans remind us that cultural disappearance does not always come through destruction. Sometimes it comes through transition, absorption, and quiet abandonment. Their cities were not erased, but repurposed. Their ideas lived on, but under different names. The Minoan civilization didn't fall in flames remembered by history. It faded into the foundations of the world that followed, and in that fading lies its mystery, not as a sudden end marked by catastrophe alone, but as a gradual loss of identity in a world that no longer supported the balance it once depended on. The Nazca Mummies Controversy. In the arid deserts of southern Peru, a region already known for its enigmatic geoglyphs carved into the earth, a new and deeply divisive mystery emerged in the early 21st century. It did not begin with an excavation by a university or a museum, but with leaked images, private claims, and online videos showing small, desiccated bodies with elongated skulls, unusual hands, and features that appeared to challenge conventional human anatomy. These remains quickly became known as the Nazca mummies, and almost immediately, they ignited one of the most polarizing debates in modern archaeology. What makes this case so controversial is not just the physical appearance of the remains, but the circumstances under which they were revealed. The mummies were reportedly discovered by local huaqueros, grave robbers who often work outside legal frameworks, in caves near the Nazca region. Instead of being documented through controlled excavation, the bodies were removed, handled, and presented without transparent archaeological context. This lack of provenance is critical. In archaeology, context is everything. Without knowing exactly where an object was found, how it was positioned, and what surrounded it, interpretation becomes unstable. The Nazca mummies entered public view already separated from their original environment, making verification difficult and trust fragile from the start. The bodies themselves vary in size and form. Some are small, with 3 elongated fingers and toes. Others are more human-sized, with modified skulls and unusual bone arrangements. The skin appears desiccated and covered in a white powder, later identified as diatomaceous earth, a substance sometimes used to preserve remains. X-rays and CT scans show skeletal structures that, at first glance, seem inconsistent with normal human anatomy. These images fueled extraordinary claims. Some proponents argued that the mummies represented a previously unknown humanoid species, or even non-human entities. DNA tests were cited selectively, often without peer-reviewed publication, to suggest genetic anomalies. The presentation of this information through media platforms rather than academic journals intensified skepticism. Mainstream archaeologists and forensic experts responded with strong criticism. Many pointed out signs of manipulation, suggesting that the bodies may have been assembled using human and animal bones, rearranged to create unfamiliar forms. In some scans, bones appear mismatched in size or orientation. Joints lack proper articulation. This points toward fabrication rather than biology. From this perspective, the Nazca mummies are not evidence of lost species, but of modern intervention. Another concern is cultural damage. The Nazca region contains legitimate archaeological heritage tied to well-documented ancient cultures. The unauthorized removal and alteration of remains, regardless of their authenticity, represents a violation of cultural and ethical standards. Even if the mummies were entirely human, their treatment removed them from meaningful scientific study. Peruvian authorities have repeatedly stated that the mummies lack scientific credibility and may involve criminal activity related to looting and trafficking of artifacts. Investigations were opened, and official statements emphasized that no recognized institution had validated the extraordinary claims surrounding the remains. This official rejection, however, did not end the controversy. The Nazca mummies continued to circulate in documentaries, online discussions, and speculative narratives. For some, the resistance of mainstream science is seen as evidence of suppression rather than caution. For others, the case stands as a clear example of how sensationalism can overwhelm methodical inquiry. The deeper issue revealed by this controversy is not whether the mummies are real or fabricated, but how easily trust erodes when evidence bypasses established processes. Archaeology depends on slow verification, peer review, and transparency. When those steps are skipped, even genuine discoveries risk being dismissed. From a human perspective, the Nazca mummies controversy exposes a tension between curiosity and credibility. People want answers to big questions about human origins and the unknown. But when claims move faster than evidence, the result is confusion rather than understanding. It is also a reminder that not all mysteries are ancient. Some are created in the present, shaped by media, incentives, and the desire for attention. These modern layers can obscure the past more effectively than time ever could. As of now, there's no accepted scientific consensus supporting the idea that the Nazca mummies represent a non-human or unknown ancient species. The prevailing view among experts is that the remains are either manipulated human bodies, constructed assemblages, or misrepresented findings lacking proper documentation. That conclusion, however, does not resolve the discomfort. The images exist, the scans exist, the debate exists, and as long as the remains remain outside transparent scientific control, uncertainty will persist. The Nazca mummies serve as a cautionary tale rather than a solved mystery. They remind us that extraordinary claims require not just extraordinary evidence, but extraordinary care. Without context, even real bones lose their voice. Without trust, even genuine inquiry fractures. The desert preserved the past for thousands of years. The present complicated it in a matter of months. And in that collision between ancient remains and modern controversy, the true mystery may not be what the bodies are, but how easily the search for understanding can be derailed when process is ignored. The Sacsayhuaman builders debate. High above the city of Cusco, on a limestone ridge overlooking the former heart of the Inca Empire, stands a structure that immediately unsettles anyone who approaches it closely. Massive stone walls rise in zigzag formations, built from blocks so large and precisely fitted that even a knife blade cannot be slipped between them. This place is known as Sacsayhuaman, and while its builders are traditionally identified as the Inca, the true debate centers not on who controlled the site, but on how such construction was achieved, and whether what we see today represents a single moment of building or the culmination of much older work. Sacsayhuaman is often described as a fortress, though this label is misleading. Its walls are defensive in appearance, but the site also functioned as a ceremonial and symbolic space tied closely to Cusco itself. In Inca cosmology, Cusco was shaped like a puma, and Sacsayhuaman formed the head. This alone suggests that the site was conceived as part of a larger sacred landscape rather than a purely military installation. What draws attention immediately are the stones. Some blocks weigh more than 100 tons. They are irregular in shape, with multiple angles, yet fit together with extraordinary precision. No mortar was used. The stones locked together through complex interlocking surfaces, allowing the walls to withstand earthquakes that destroyed later colonial buildings in Cusco below. This seismic resilience is not accidental. It reflects deep understanding of stone behavior under stress. The conventional explanation is that the Inca quarried these stones using stone tools, transported them using human labor, ropes, and ramps, and shaped them through abrasion over long periods of time. This explanation is supported by Inca engineering knowledge in other contexts and by historical accounts describing large labor forces organized through the Mita system. And yet, doubts persist. The scale of the largest blocks raises logistical questions. Quarries lie kilometers away, across uneven terrain. Moving stones of such size without wheeled vehicles, iron tools, or draft animals would have required immense coordination and time. While this does not make it impossible, it does push the limits of what is comfortably explained. Equally puzzling is the level of precision. The stones are not simply stacked. Each one appears custom-shaped to match its neighbors, sometimes with inward curving joints and hidden locking points. This suggests not trial-and-error placement, but advanced planning. Once placed, many stones could not be adjusted without dismantling entire sections. This implies a building sequence that was carefully controlled. Another layer of debate concerns chronology. Some scholars argue that the Inca inherited or modified earlier structures built by pre-Inca cultures. Excavations show evidence of earlier occupation in the region, and certain lower courses of stonework appear more massive and refined than upper sections. This has led to the idea that Sacsayhuaman may represent multiple construction phases across centuries. If true, the Inca may have expanded, repaired, or repurposed an already monumental site, rather than building it entirely from scratch. This interpretation doesn't diminish Inca achievement. Instead, it places them within a longer tradition of Andean stoneworking that evolved over time. The Andes are filled with megalithic sites, such as Ollantaytambo and Pumapunku, that display similar traits of precision and scale. Together, they suggest a regional engineering philosophy rather than isolated brilliance. However, the lack of written records complicates certainty. The Inca relied on quipu, a knot-based recording system which has not yet been fully deciphered. As a result, construction methods were never described in detail. Spanish chroniclers wrote about Inca building practices, but often through misunderstanding or exaggeration, and always after the fact. Modern reconstructions attempt to demonstrate feasibility using experimental archaeology. Small-scale experiments show that stones can be shaped with hammerstones and moved using ropes and rollers. But scaling these experiments up to the largest blocks at Sacsayhuaman remains difficult to demonstrate conclusively. This gap between theoretical possibility and demonstrated reality is where debate thrives. From a human perspective, Sacsayhuaman challenges assumptions about technological hierarchy. It reminds us that sophistication does not require metal tools or written blueprints. Knowledge can be embodied in practice, passed through apprenticeship, repetition, and shared cultural memory. At the same time, it warns against oversimplification. Explaining everything as brute labor risks underestimating ancient intelligence. Explaining everything as lost technology risks replacing one assumption with another. The truth likely lies between these extremes. The builders of Sacsayhuaman were not mysterious outsiders. They were Andean people working within a long tradition of stone mastery, but the exact methods, sequences, and organizational strategies they used remain only partially understood. The stones tell us what was achieved, not how every step was taken. Sacsayhuaman stands as both evidence and challenge. It proves that ancient societies could achieve engineering feats that still impress modern observers. It also reminds us that absence of explanation does not equal impossibility, but neither does it justify complacency. The walls endure, the joints remain sealed, the earthquakes pass harmlessly through, and above Cusco the stones of Sacsayhuaman continue to hold their shape, quietly sustaining a debate not about whether the Inca were capable, but about how much knowledge can be lost when a civilization builds without leaving written instructions behind. The lost capital of the Khmer Empire. For centuries, the Khmer Empire was one of the most powerful and sophisticated civilizations in Southeast Asia, ruling vast territories from what is now Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. Its most famous legacy, the Temple of Angkor Wat, stands today as one of the largest religious monuments ever built. Yet Angkor Wat was only one part of something far greater. Surrounding it once existed an immense urban landscape, a capital so large and complex that, for a long time, modern historians failed to recognize it as a city at all. This capital was Angkor, and its true scale remained hidden not because it was destroyed, but because it blended too well into the landscape. The Khmer capital reached its height between the 9th and 15th centuries CE. At its peak, Angkor supported a population that may have exceeded 1 million people, making it one of the largest pre-industrial cities in human history. Unlike stone-built cities with dense walls and streets, Angkor was spread out across hundreds of square kilometers, interwoven with forests, fields, canals, reservoirs, and temples. This dispersed design is one of the main reasons Angkor was misunderstood for so long. Early explorers and colonial archaeologists focused on monumental temples and assumed they were isolated religious complexes surrounded by jungle. The idea that these temples were embedded within a vast, functioning urban system did not fully take shape until the late 20th and early 21st centuries, when new technology changed how the landscape could be seen. The key to Angkor's power was water. The Khmer engineered one of the most sophisticated hydraulic systems ever built by a pre-modern society. Massive reservoirs called barrays, intricate canal networks, embankments, and spillways controlled seasonal floods and stored water during droughts. This system supported intensive rice agriculture, allowing Angkor to sustain enormous populations in a region with highly variable rainfall. Water management was not just practical, it was ideological. In Khmer cosmology, kings were linked to divine order, and control of water symbolized control over the cosmos itself. Temples were aligned with reservoirs and cardinal directions, turning the landscape into a physical expression of religious belief and political authority. Angkor was not simply a city, it was a sacred diagram made inhabitable. For centuries, this system worked. Then, gradually, it did not. Historical records from neighboring regions and archaeological evidence suggest that Angkor faced increasing strain in the 14th and 15th centuries. Climate studies indicate periods of severe drought, punctuated by intense monsoon flooding. Such extremes placed enormous pressure on water infrastructure designed for balance rather than volatility. Channels silted up, reservoirs overflowed, or dried out. Maintenance became increasingly difficult. At the same time, political pressures mounted. The Khmer Empire faced external threats from rival states, particularly Ayutthaya to the west. Trade routes shifted toward maritime commerce, reducing Angkor's strategic importance as an inland capital. Power began to decentralize. What makes Angkor's decline particularly striking is that it was not destroyed in a single catastrophic event. There's no clear archaeological layer of sudden devastation across the city. Temples were not systematically burned. Populations did not vanish overnight. Instead, Angkor appears to have thinned out gradually. Administrative centers moved. Elites relocated. The city's heart continued to beat, but more faintly with each generation. Eventually, Angkor was no longer the capital. The population dispersed into smaller settlements, many of which still exist today. Monks continued to use temples. Farmers continued to work the land. Life went on, but the centralized urban system that had defined the empire unraveled. For centuries afterward, Angkor was described as a lost city swallowed by jungle. In reality, it was never truly lost. It was abandoned selectively, repurposed rather than erased. The forest did not destroy Angkor. It simply grew into the spaces no longer maintained. Modern LiDAR surveys finally revealed the full extent of the city beneath the trees. What emerged was not a single lost capital, but an entire urban civilization, meticulously planned and environmentally integrated on a scale that rivaled modern metropolitan regions. From a human perspective, Angkor's story is unsettling because it challenges how we recognize cities. We look for walls, streets, and density. Angkor was diffuse, organic, and dependent on balance. When that balance failed, the city did not collapse violently. It dissolved. The capital was not lost to invasion alone. It was not lost to nature alone. It was lost to complexity that exceeded its capacity to adapt. The lost capital of the Khmer Empire stands as a reminder that some of the greatest cities in history did not fall in flames or ruins. They faded when the systems that sustained them became too intricate to maintain under changing conditions. Angkor still stands. The temples still rise, but the capital that once connected them all exists now mostly as patterns beneath the forest floor, visible only when technology lifts the veil, revealing a city that was not destroyed, but quietly left behind by history. The Mohenjo-Daro Abandonment Mystery. Along the banks of the Indus River, in what is now modern-day Pakistan, lies the remains of a city so carefully designed that it still unsettles archaeologists a century after its discovery. Mohenjo-Daro was not an accidental settlement or a slowly growing village. It was a fully planned urban center, built with standardized bricks, straight streets laid out in a grid, advanced drainage systems, and public infrastructure that rivaled cities built thousands of years later. And yet, despite this sophistication, the city was eventually abandoned, not in chaos or visible destruction, but in silence. Mohenjo-Daro flourished around 2600 to 1900 BCE as part of the Indus Valley Civilization, one of the world's earliest urban cultures alongside Mesopotamia and Egypt. At its height, the city may have supported 40,000 or more inhabitants. Houses were constructed with uniform proportions, wells were built throughout residential areas, and an extensive covered drainage system carried wastewater away from homes and streets with remarkable efficiency. This level of planning suggests strong civic organization, technical knowledge, and shared standards across the city. What makes Mohenjo-Daro especially unusual is what it lacks. There are no obvious palaces, no monumental temples towering over the population, and no clear signs of royal authority. Power, if it existed, does not announce itself through architecture. Instead, the city appears egalitarian in layout, with similar quality housing across large areas and public amenities distributed widely. The famous Great Bath exemplifies this approach, built with careful waterproofing and surrounded by rooms that suggest ritual use. It appears to have been a communal space rather than an elite one. This points toward social cohesion built around shared practices rather than hierarchy enforced by force. For decades, early interpretations suggested that Mohenjo-Daro was destroyed by invasion. Skeletons found in the streets were cited as evidence of massacre. This idea has largely been abandoned. Later analysis showed that the remains came from different time periods and do not represent a single violent event. There's no widespread burn layer, no destroyed fortifications, and no weapons scattered across the city. In short, there's no clear sign of war. Environmental explanations have become more prominent. The Indus River system is dynamic, prone to shifting courses and flooding. Geological evidence suggests that changes in river behavior could have undermined agriculture and habitability. Repeated floods may have damaged infrastructure and forced residents to rebuild multiple times, gradually making the city less viable. Climate change likely played a role as well. Studies indicate weakening monsoon patterns toward the end of the Indus Valley civilization. Reduced rainfall would have affected crop yields, water supply, and trade routes, placing strain on urban centers dependent on agricultural surplus. Yet, environmental stress alone does not fully explain Mohenjo-Daro's fate. The city was rebuilt repeatedly after floods, showing resilience and commitment to place. Its eventual abandonment appears deliberate rather than desperate. People did not flee suddenly. They left gradually, taking knowledge, skills, and cultural traditions with them. One of the most enduring mysteries is the disappearance of writing. The Indus script, found on seals and artifacts throughout the civilization, remains undeciphered. When urban centers declined, the script vanished as well. Without texts, we lack direct insight into political decisions, social tensions, or belief systems that may have influenced abandonment. This silence is profound. Trade patterns also shifted. Evidence suggests that long-distance trade with Mesopotamia declined during this period. As economic networks weakened, cities like Mohenjo-Daro may have lost their central role. Smaller, more flexible settlements could have offered better survival under changing conditions. Another factor may have been social transformation. The Indus Valley civilization shows signs of decentralization in its later phases. Population appears to have dispersed into rural areas and smaller towns, rather than concentrating in large cities. This was not collapse in the dramatic sense, but reorganization. From a human perspective, Mohenjo-Daro is unsettling because it contradicts familiar narratives of decline. There's no conqueror to blame, no final disaster to point to, no clear villain. The city did not fall. It was set aside. Its people seem to have chosen adaptation over attachment. Modern visitors walking through Mohenjo-Daro encounter streets still aligned with cardinal directions, brickwork still visible, drains still tracing their paths beneath the ground. The city feels paused rather than destroyed, as if life simply stepped away. This impression may be misleading, but it captures the emotional weight of the site. Mohenjo-Daro stands as a reminder that not all endings are violent. Some of the most advanced societies in history chose to disperse rather than endure unsustainable conditions. Their knowledge did not vanish, but their cities did. The planners left no farewell inscription. The engineers left no explanation. What remains is a city that was built with extraordinary care and abandoned with equal restraint, leaving behind a question that still echoes through its empty streets. Not what destroyed Mohenjo-Daro, but why its people decided that leaving was the wiser choice. The Saqqara bird, stability and lift debate. In 1898, during excavations at Saqqara, one of Egypt's most important burial grounds, archaeologists uncovered a small wooden object buried within a 1st century BCE tomb. At first glance, it appeared unremarkable, easily categorized as a stylized bird figurine placed among funerary goods. For decades, it remained quietly stored in a museum collection, attracting little attention. It was only in the 20th century, when its shape was examined more closely, that the object began to raise questions no one had expected to ask. This object is now known as the Saqqara bird. Carved from sycamore wood and measuring roughly 14 centimeters in length, the Saqqara bird features a streamlined body, straight wings, and a vertical tail fin. What it lacks is just as important as what it includes. There are no visible legs, no feathers carved into the wings, and no decorative detailing typical of Egyptian animal figurines. The form is minimal, almost abstract, focused on shape rather than symbolism. This is where the debate begins. To some observers, the Saqqara bird resembles a glider or model aircraft more than a bird. Its wings are flat and horizontal. Its body tapers smoothly. The vertical tail resembles a rudder rather than a natural tail. These features prompted claims that the object represents ancient knowledge of flight, or even a primitive aircraft model. Such interpretations spread widely, fueled by reconstructions and experiments that attempted to demonstrate aerodynamic lift. In some tests, replicas of the Saqqara bird were modified slightly and shown to glide briefly when launched, reinforcing speculation that the original object may have been designed with flight in mind. However, modification is the key issue. The original Saqqara bird lacks a horizontal tailplane, a component necessary for stability in controlled flight. Without it, the object would be aerodynamically unstable. Modern tests that demonstrate gliding almost always add a stabilizer that is not present on the original artifact. This fundamentally alters the object and undermines claims about its original function. Mainstream Egyptologists and aeronautical engineers argue that the Saqqara bird fits comfortably within known Egyptian artistic traditions. Birds were commonly represented in simplified forms, especially in ritual or symbolic contexts. The object may have served as a toy, a ceremonial item, or a symbolic representation of the Ba, the soul, which was often depicted as a bird in Egyptian belief. From this perspective, the lack of detailed features is not technological, but stylistic. Yet even within this explanation, questions remain. Most Egyptian bird figurines include legs or perching elements. The Saqqara bird does not. Its wings are unusually straight and rigid. The vertical tail fin is uncommon in naturalistic depictions. These deviations suggest that the maker was prioritizing balance and symmetry over realism. This does not prove aerodynamic intent, but it complicates purely symbolic interpretations. Another possibility is that the object functioned as a weather vane or ritual device attached to a mast or pole. In this role, stability in wind rather than sustained flight would matter. The vertical tail would help align the object with airflow, and the wings would provide surface area. This interpretation fits better with the object's physical properties and does not require advanced knowledge of aerodynamics. Even so, no direct evidence confirms this use. The broader issue raised by the Saqqara bird is how easily modern frameworks shape interpretation. Once an object is viewed through the lens of aviation, every curve and surface is examined for lift and drag. Once viewed through ritual symbolism, the same features become abstracted representations of belief. Both approaches risk projection. The Saqqara bird does not come with instructions. It was not found alongside tools, diagrams, or text describing its purpose. It exists alone, removed from its original context, forcing modern observers to infer function from form. From a human perspective, this is where discomfort arises. We want objects to belong clearly to one category or another. The Saqqara bird resists that clarity. It looks functional without proving function. It looks symbolic without fitting neatly into known motifs. It occupies an uncomfortable middle space. Importantly, there's no evidence that ancient Egyptians developed powered flight or gliding technology in any practical sense. Their genius lay elsewhere, in architecture, mathematics, medicine, and symbolic thought. The Saqqara bird does not overturn that understanding, but it does remind us that ancient craftsmanship sometimes produced forms that intersect unexpectedly with modern ideas. The Saqqara bird remains neither proof of lost aviation nor a trivial curiosity. It is a small object carrying a disproportionate weight of interpretation. Its true purpose may have been simple, ceremonial, or playful, and yet its shape continues to invite questions about intention, design, and the limits of what we assume ancient people could imagine. The bird does not fly. The debate does. And in that debate lies a deeper lesson, that when context is lost, even the smallest artifact can become a mirror for modern expectations, reflecting not just the past, but the assumptions we bring with us when we try to explain it. The Voynich manuscript ink recipe mystery. In the early 15th century, someone sat down and carefully began to write a book unlike any other known manuscript in human history. The pages were filled with strange symbols that resemble no known language, illustrations of plants that do not clearly match any real species, diagrams of unfamiliar stars, and human figures immersed in systems of pipes, pools, and circular structures whose meaning remains deeply unclear. This book is now known as the Voynich manuscript, and while its text has resisted all attempts at translation, another mystery runs quietly beneath the surface, one that concerns not what was written, but how it was written. The Voynich manuscript is not a myth or a later forgery invented in modern times. Radiocarbon dating of the parchment places its creation firmly in the early 1400s. The ink used throughout the manuscript has been analyzed repeatedly using modern techniques, and the results are consistent and unambiguous. The materials used were entirely appropriate for the medieval period. There are no modern pigments, no synthetic compounds, and no signs of later tampering. This creates a paradox. If the manuscript is a hoax, it is an extraordinarily disciplined one. The ink composition is consistent across hundreds of pages. The writing style shows no hesitation, no correction, and no visible struggle to invent symbols. The text flows naturally, with patterns, repetition, and structure that resemble real language rather than random noise. Ink analysis reveals that the primary writing ink is based on iron gall, the standard ink used across medieval Europe. This ink was made by combining iron salts with tannins extracted from oak galls, producing a dark, durable pigment. The Voynich ink matches this recipe closely. It does not stand out chemically from other manuscripts of its time. This normality is what makes it unsettling. A forger attempting to deceive would have needed not only knowledge of medieval ink chemistry, but the discipline to maintain perfect consistency across the entire manuscript. Without slipping into recognizable language or symbolism, there's no evidence of trial runs, abandoned alphabets, or corrections that would suggest experimentation. The illustrations add another layer. Colored inks and pigments used for plants, stars, and figures are also period appropriate. Analysis shows the use of minerals and organic pigments available in the 15th century. Nothing about the materials suggests later invention, and yet no one can read the text. Linguists, cryptographers, mathematicians, and computer scientists have spent decades attempting to decode the manuscript. Some approaches treat it as a cipher, others as an unknown natural language, and still others as a constructed system designed to imitate meaning without conveying it. Statistical analysis shows that the text follows rules. Word lengths, character frequency, and repetition patterns behave like genuine language. But language requires reference, and reference is missing. The ink itself offers no hidden message. There are no invisible writings, no chemical tricks, no layered text revealed under different light conditions. The mystery is not concealed in the material. It is embedded in the system. This suggests intention rather than deception. One theory proposes that the manuscript was written for a closed audience, using a private code understood by only a few individuals. Another suggests it may represent an early attempt at encoding natural philosophy, medicine, or alchemy in symbolic form rather than direct language. In this context, the strange plants and diagrams may not be literal, but conceptual. The ink supports this idea. Iron gall ink was chosen not for secrecy, but for permanence. Whoever wrote the Voynich manuscript wanted it to last. Another possibility is that the manuscript represents a form of lost knowledge transmission, where meaning was conveyed visually and structurally rather than linguistically. The ink becomes a tool of continuity rather than clarity. From a human perspective, the Voynich manuscript is disturbing because it violates expectations. Most unsolved texts are unreadable because they are damaged, incomplete, or written in extinct languages with limited samples. The Voynich manuscript is pristine, complete, and carefully executed. It looks ready to be understood, yet refuses comprehension. The ink is not the problem. The alphabet is not the problem. The age is not the problem. The problem is context. Who wrote it and for whom remains unknown. No library record mentions it. No scholar of the time references it. It appears in history fully formed, then vanishes again, until its rediscovery centuries later. This silence is total. Modern technology has not resolved the issue. Artificial intelligence can detect structure, but not meaning. Pattern recognition confirms order, but not intent. Chemical analysis confirms authenticity, but not purpose. The ink tells us the manuscript is real, but offers no guidance on how to read it. The Voynich manuscript stands as a reminder that authenticity does not guarantee understanding. A text can be genuine, carefully crafted, and historically grounded, yet remain completely opaque if its cultural framework disappears. The ink has endured. The pages have survived. The message remains unreachable. And in that gap between material certainty and intellectual silence lies the true mystery of the Voynich manuscript, not as a trick or anomaly, but as evidence that knowledge can be preserved perfectly and still be lost entirely when the world that gave it meaning no longer exists. The Ayyud aluminum alloy anomaly. In 1973, during excavation work along the banks of the Mureș River near the town of Ayyud in Romania, workers uncovered an object that immediately confused those who examined it. Found alongside fossilized animal bones believed to be tens of thousands of years old, the object was metallic, wedge-shaped, and clearly manufactured. Unlike stone tools or organic remains, it showed signs of machining. This discovery became known as the Ayyud aluminum object, and it remains one of the most controversial anomalies in archaeological discussion. At first glance, the object looks industrial. It weighs just over 2 kilograms and has a shape that suggests deliberate engineering rather than natural formation. Its surface is oxidized, covered by a thick layer of aluminum oxide, which typically forms over long periods of time. This oxidation initially led some researchers to suggest great age, possibly far older than the invention of aluminum metallurgy. This is where the problem begins. Aluminum does not occur naturally in metallic form. It must be refined from ore using complex industrial processes that were only developed in the 19th century. Prior to that, aluminum was unknown as a usable metal. If the odd object is genuinely ancient, then its material composition contradicts established technological timelines. Laboratory analysis confirmed that the object is composed primarily of aluminum, mixed with other elements such as copper, silicon, zinc, and lead, forming an alloy. The presence of these elements suggests intentional formulation, rather than accidental contamination. The alloy composition does not match pure modern aluminum, but neither does it correspond to any known ancient metalworking tradition. This ambiguity has fueled speculation. Some have proposed that the object is evidence of lost advanced technology, arguing that it could not have been produced by known ancient cultures. Others suggest it represents non-human or unknown intervention. These interpretations are dramatic, but they struggle to account for a crucial factor: context. The Ayyud object was not recovered in a controlled archaeological excavation. It was found during industrial digging, and documentation of its exact position, depth, and association with other materials is incomplete. The animal bones found nearby were assumed to be ancient, but their precise relationship to the metal object was never firmly established. Without clear stratigraphic context, age becomes uncertain. More conservative explanations focus on the possibility that the object is modern and entered the ground relatively recently. Some engineers have suggested it resembles a component from heavy machinery, such as a digging or construction tool fragment. Romania, like much of Europe, underwent extensive industrial activity during the 20th century. A modern object could have been buried accidentally and later misinterpreted as ancient due to its proximity to older material. The oxide layer, often cited as evidence of extreme age, does not conclusively support ancient origin. Aluminum oxidizes rapidly when exposed to air, forming a protective layer that can thicken under certain environmental conditions. Oxidation alone cannot be used as a reliable dating method. This explanation resolves many issues, but not all. Critics of the modern tool theory point out that no exact match has been identified among known machine parts. The shape appears unusual, and the alloy composition does not neatly align with standard industrial components. This leaves the object in an unresolved category, neither clearly ancient nor confidently modern. From a scientific standpoint, unresolved does not mean revolutionary. Archaeology depends heavily on context. An object removed from its original setting loses much of its explanatory power. Without precise documentation, even sophisticated analysis cannot reconstruct certainty. The Ayyud object suffers from this limitation more than most. From a human perspective, the fascination with the Ayyud aluminum anomaly reveals how strongly we react when timelines appear threatened. The idea of advanced technology in deep antiquity is compelling because it challenges linear views of progress. But compelling ideas require solid evidence, and solid evidence requires controlled discovery. At present, there is no verified proof that the Ayyud object is ancient. There's also no definitive proof that it is modern debris. It occupies an uncomfortable space between skepticism and speculation, sustained largely by incomplete information. This is not unusual in archaeology. Many objects remain unresolved not because they rewrite history, but because the data needed to classify them was lost at the moment of discovery. Once that moment passes, no amount of later analysis can fully recover it. The Ayyud aluminum object stands as a cautionary example rather than a solved mystery. It reminds us that extraordinary claims often grow in the absence of context, and that uncertainty is not evidence of the impossible. The object exists. The alloy is real. The explanation remains incomplete. And in that incompleteness lies the real lesson, that the most persistent mysteries are not always those that defy science, but those created when evidence is separated from its story, leaving us with material facts but no reliable path to understanding how they truly came to be. The Sumerian star tablets and their calculation accuracy. More than 5,000 years ago, in the cities of southern Mesopotamia, People were recording the movements of the sky with a level of care and consistency that still surprises modern researchers. Long before telescopes, mechanical clocks, or modern mathematics, Sumerian scribes pressed symbols into clay tablets that tracked stars, planets, and celestial cycles with remarkable accuracy. These records, often referred to as Sumerian star tablets, raise a fundamental question that continues to challenge historians of science. How did such early observers achieve calculations precise enough to remain useful for centuries? The Sumerians did not view the sky as a distant abstraction. For them, the heavens were active, meaningful, and directly connected to life on Earth. Celestial movements governed calendars, agricultural cycles, religious rituals, and royal authority. Because of this, observing the sky was not a curiosity, it was a necessity. Among the most important of these records are early astronomical lists, and later compilations such as the Emulapin tablets, which preserve much older observational traditions. These texts catalog the rising and setting of stars, the paths of planets, and the timing of eclipses. They divide the sky into structured zones and associate celestial events with specific times of the year. What stands out is not symbolism, but consistency. The observations recorded on these tablets align closely with actual astronomical phenomena. Star risings correspond to seasonal changes. Planetary movements follow predictable paths. Lunar cycles are tracked accurately enough to support long-term calendar systems. This level of reliability suggests sustained observation across many generations. The Sumerians achieved this without optical instruments. Their tools were simple: the naked eye, horizon markers, counting systems, and timekeeping based on water clocks and shadow measurements. Yet they developed a mathematical framework capable of handling recurring cycles, irregular planetary motion, and long-term prediction. One key to this success was their numerical system. The Sumerians used a base 60 system rather than base 10. This choice, likely influenced by practical counting methods, proved exceptionally powerful for astronomy. 60 is divisible by many numbers, allowing fractions to be expressed cleanly. This made it ideal for measuring angles, time, and cyclical divisions. The legacy of this system survives today in the way we measure hours, minutes, and degrees. Their calculations were not theoretical in the modern sense. They were empirical. Sumerian astronomers recorded what they saw, compared it against past records, and refined their expectations accordingly. Over time, patterns emerged. Errors were corrected, predictions improved. This slow accumulation of data created a tradition of astronomical knowledge that later civilizations inherited and expanded. What unsettles modern observers is how early this process began. Some tablets indicate awareness of long-term cycles that require observation over decades or centuries to identify reliably. This implies institutional continuity. Knowledge was preserved, taught, and transmitted with care. The sky became a reference system that outlived individual observers. There's no evidence that the Sumerians understood gravity or orbital mechanics. They did not need to. Their accuracy came from disciplined observation rather than abstract theory. In this sense, their astronomy resembles early navigation more than modern physics. Another important factor was standardization. Observations were made from fixed locations, using consistent reference points along the horizon. This reduced variability and allowed data from different years to be compared meaningfully. Temples and ziggurats may have served as observation platforms, providing stable sightlines across generations. The tablets also reveal awareness of irregularity. Planetary motion, especially that of Venus and Mars, doesn't follow simple patterns. Sumerian records acknowledge this complexity rather than forcing it into symmetry. This honesty toward data is one reason their records remain valuable. Later, Babylonian astronomers refined these methods further, developing predictive models that could forecast eclipses and planetary positions. But the foundation was Sumerian. Without their early observational discipline, later breakthroughs would not have been possible. From a human perspective, the Sumerian star tablets are unsettling because they challenge assumptions about intellectual progression. We tend to imagine ancient people as passive observers of nature, waiting for theory to unlock understanding. The Sumerians demonstrate a different path, where careful attention, patience, and record-keeping produced reliable knowledge without modern instruments. There's no mystery machine hidden in these tablets. There's no lost technology required to explain them. What exists instead is something more demanding. Time. Generations of observers committed to watching the same sky, writing down the same details, correcting the same mistakes, and trusting that continuity mattered. This kind of knowledge does not emerge suddenly. It accumulates slowly through discipline rather than invention. The Sumerian star tablets stand as evidence that precision does not always come from advanced tools. Sometimes it comes from commitment to observation across centuries. The calculations were accurate not because the Sumerians possessed secret technology, but because they built systems that outlasted individual lives. The sky moved. They kept watching. And in that sustained attention, they created a legacy of astronomical accuracy that still echoes in how we measure time today, reminding us that some of humanity's most enduring scientific achievements began not with instruments, but with patience, and the decision to keep looking up night after night, generation after generation. Roman surveying instruments and their accuracy. When we look at the straight roads of the Roman Empire, the carefully aligned cities, the aqueducts that maintained gentle gradients over tens of kilometers, and the boundaries that divide land with remarkable consistency, a quiet question emerges beneath the stone and mortar. How did the Romans measure space so accurately without modern instruments, optics, or digital tools? The answer lies not in lost technology, but in a disciplined system of surveying instruments and methods that transform practical observation into reliable precision. Roman engineers and surveyors, known as agrimensores, were responsible for measuring land, planning cities, laying out roads, and dividing conquered territory into organized parcels. Their work required repeatable accuracy, not approximation. Errors compounded quickly when building aqueducts or long-distance roads, and yet Roman infrastructure routinely achieved results that still impress modern engineers. One of the most important Roman surveying instruments was the groma. Simple in appearance, it consisted of a vertical staff with horizontal cross arms from which plumb lines were suspended. By aligning these hanging lines with distant markers, surveyors could establish perfect right angles. This allowed them to lay out straight roads and rectangular city grids with consistent geometry. The groma had no lenses or moving parts, but it exploited gravity itself as a reference. The plumb line does not lie. By trusting verticality, Roman surveyors anchored their measurements to a constant that did not change with distance or terrain. For measuring slopes and maintaining gradients, especially critical for aqueduct construction, the Romans used instruments such as the chorobates. This was essentially a long, straight wooden beam with grooves filled with water or hanging plumb lines along its length. By observing water levels or plumb alignment, engineers could detect even slight deviations from level. This method allowed Romans to maintain gradients as small as a few centimeters per kilometer, a level of precision that modern engineers still consider impressive, given the scale of construction. Aqueducts like those supplying Rome, Nimes, and Segovia depended on this consistency. Too steep, and water would damage channels. Too shallow, and flow would stop. Distance measurement relied on standardized units and repetition. Roman surveyors used measuring rods and ropes, calibrated to fixed lengths, such as the pies or Roman foot. By repeating these units carefully and keeping records, they reduced cumulative error. Roads were measured mile by mile, marked with milestones that reflected systematic counting rather than estimation. The key was not eliminating error entirely, but managing it. Roman surveying also relied heavily on procedure. Measurements were taken multiple times, often by different surveyors, and compared. Discrepancies were resolved before construction began. This redundancy acted as a safeguard against human error. Written manuals, such as those attributed to authors like Frontinus and later compilers of surveying texts, preserve methods and standards. These texts do not describe mysterious devices. They describe practice, discipline, and consistency. Knowledge was institutional rather than individual. Another important factor was visual alignment across landscapes. Roman roads often followed straight lines not because terrain was ignored, but because long-distance sightlines were established using markers, poles, and elevated points. Hills, towers, and temporary structures provided reference points. Surveying was as much about organizing space visually as measuring it numerically. From a modern perspective, what is most striking is how little improvisation was allowed. Roman surveying was procedural. Deviations required justification. Authority rested not in innovation, but in adherence to method. This approach produced uniformity across an empire spanning 3 continents. Some modern observers, seeing this precision, speculate about lost instruments or advanced knowledge now forgotten. The archaeological record does not support this. The tools have been found. They are simple. Their effectiveness lies in how they were used, not in hidden complexity. Accuracy emerged from systems, not devices. From a human perspective, Roman surveying challenges the assumption that technological sophistication requires advanced machinery. The Romans achieved consistency by embedding measurement into governance, training, and law. Land division was not just technical, it was political. Boundaries mattered, and so accuracy mattered. Surveyors were trusted officials. Their measurements carried legal weight. This social importance ensured that methods were respected and maintained. Precision was enforced culturally, as much as technically. Roman surveying instruments stand as reminders that reliable measurement does not depend solely on innovation. It depends on discipline, standardization, and continuity. The Romans measured the world not with extraordinary tools, but with extraordinary consistency. The roads still run straight, the aqueducts still stand, and beneath their stone foundations lies a quiet truth: that accuracy can be achieved with simple instruments when human systems are designed to support careful observation, repeated verification, and respect for method, proving that precision is as much a product of organization as it is of technology. Ancient water clocks and the problem of flow regulation. Long before gears, springs, pendulums, or electronic pulses, ancient civilizations faced a problem that seems simple but is technically unforgiving. How do you measure time when the only tools available are gravity, water, and containers made by hand? The solution they developed was the water clock, or clepsydra, a device used across Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, China, India, and the Islamic world. What makes these clocks remarkable is not that they existed, but that they worked reliably enough to regulate daily life, religious rituals, legal proceedings, and astronomical observation, all despite water being one of the most unstable substances imaginable. Water does not flow at a constant rate on its own. As a vessel empties, pressure changes, temperature alters viscosity, impurities clog openings, evaporation subtly shifts volume. Any one of these factors can distort timekeeping. And yet, ancient water clocks were trusted instruments, sometimes used to divide the night into equal hours, or to time speeches in courts of law. This trust required more than a bowl with a hole. Early water clocks took 2 main forms. In outflow clocks, water escaped from a vessel at the bottom, and the lowering water level marked the passage of time. In inflow clocks, water dripped into a container, and rising levels were tracked instead. Both systems faced the same fundamental challenge: regulating flow so that time did not speed up or slow down unpredictably. Ancient engineers addressed this through careful design rather than abstract theory. They experimented with hole size, vessel shape, and water depth until consistent behavior emerged. In Egypt, clepsydras from the New Kingdom show interior markings that compensated for seasonal changes in night length, acknowledging that time itself was not constant across the year. This reveals an important insight. These clocks were not naive. They were adaptive. Greek water clocks introduced refinements aimed at stabilizing flow. Some designs used conical vessels rather than cylindrical ones, allowing the changing water pressure to be offset by changing cross-sectional area. As pressure decreased, the widening shape slowed the drop in water level, creating a more even rate of descent. This is not guesswork. It is applied understanding gained through observation. In more complex systems, intermediate reservoirs were introduced. Instead of water flowing directly from the main container, it passed through a regulating chamber that maintained a nearly constant head of pressure. This concept is strikingly similar to modern flow regulators. The principle is the same, even if the materials differ. By the Hellenistic period, water clocks had become intricate machines. Some incorporated floats connected to pointers or gears, translating water movement into visible indicators. Others used siphons that periodically emptied compartments, producing step time signals. These mechanisms did not require mathematical formulas. They required patience, testing, and correction. The Islamic Golden Age pushed these ideas further. Engineers such as Al-Jazari described elaborate water clocks, featuring calibrated flow regulators, feedback systems, and even automated figures that moved at specific intervals. In these designs, Flow regulation was not accidental. It was central. What is important to recognize is that none of these cultures fully understood fluid dynamics in the modern sense. They did not calculate Reynolds numbers or derive flow equations. Instead, they relied on controlled experimentation across generations. Designs that worked were preserved. Designs that failed were abandoned. This is how practical knowledge accumulates. From a human perspective, ancient water clocks are unsettling because they demonstrate functional precision without formal theory. The builders knew water misbehaved. They did not deny this, they designed around it. They accepted imperfection and compensated for it. These clocks were not perfect by modern standards, but perfection was not required. Consistency was. Courts needed equal speaking time. Priests needed reliable ritual schedules. Astronomers needed repeatable intervals to track celestial motion. Water clocks provided this stability well enough to support complex social systems. Modern experiments reconstructing ancient clepsydras confirm this. When built according to surviving descriptions, many produce surprisingly regular flow, especially when environmental conditions are controlled. The regulation is not exact, but it is predictable. And predictability is the foundation of timekeeping. Ancient water clocks stand as reminders that technological sophistication does not always begin with equations. It often begins with attention. Attention to materials. Attention to behavior. Attention repeated across years, then centuries. Water flows. Time passes. Between those two facts, ancient engineers carved out reliability, using observation instead of abstraction. Their clocks measured time not because they mastered physics, but because they respected the limits of water and worked patiently within them, proving that even unstable systems can be harnessed when human ingenuity focuses not on control, but on balance. The Chinese seismograph and its detection method. In the year 132 CE, during the Eastern Han Dynasty, a scholar and court official named Zhang Heng presented an instrument to the imperial court that challenged the very idea of how disasters could be known. Earthquakes were among the most feared events in ancient China, not only because of destruction, but because they were believed to signal cosmic imbalance and political failure. Yet earthquakes often struck far from the capital, leaving the court unaware until messengers arrived days or weeks later. Zhang Heng's invention addressed this gap in a way that still feels counterintuitive even today. The device is known as the Hufengdidong Yi, often described as the world's first seismograph. At first glance, it did not look like a scientific instrument. It was a large bronze vessel, ornate and symbolic, decorated with dragons arranged around its circumference. Beneath each dragon's mouth sat a bronze toad, waiting with open jaws. Inside the vessel was a mechanism hidden from view, deliberately sealed so that its function could not be disturbed. What made the device extraordinary was not that it measured earthquakes, but that it detected distant ones that were not felt locally. Historical records describe how, in one famous instance, a dragon released a bronze ball into a toad's mouth, indicating an earthquake had occurred in a specific direction. At the time, no tremor was felt in the capital. Days later, messengers arrived confirming that a powerful earthquake had struck hundreds of kilometers away, precisely in the direction indicated by the instrument. This result stunned observers then and now. The central mystery lies in how the device worked. No original example survives, and Zhang Heng's detailed mechanical description has been lost. What remains are historical texts describing its behavior, not its construction. As a result, the seismograph's detection method has been debated for centuries. The most widely accepted reconstructions suggest that the instrument relied on inertia rather than sensitivity. Inside the vessel, a suspended mass or pendulum remained relatively stationary when the ground moved. When seismic waves passed through the structure, the outer casing moved with the earth, but the internal mass lagged slightly behind due to inertia. This relative motion triggered a mechanical linkage corresponding to the direction of the incoming wave. This directional sensitivity is critical. Earthquake waves travel outward from a source. The earliest waves arrive from a specific direction. Zhang Heng's design appears to have been intended not to measure magnitude, but to identify where the disturbance originated. This information was far more valuable to the state than raw intensity. The release of a single ball, rather than multiple ones, suggests that the mechanism filtered signals carefully, responding only when motion exceeded a threshold. This would prevent false triggers from everyday vibrations such as wind, carts, or human activity. In other words, the device was selective. Modern reconstructions based on these principles have demonstrated that such a system is physically plausible. Using gravity, inertia, and mechanical amplification, a directional trigger can be created without electronics, springs, or precise machining. The challenge lies not in theory, but in execution. This is where Zhang Heng's achievement becomes clear. To build such a device, one must understand not equations, but behavior, how structures respond to vibration, how mass resists sudden motion, how small movements can be translated into decisive mechanical actions. This knowledge does not require modern physics, but it does require careful observation and refinement. Ancient Chinese engineering excelled in this domain. Balance mechanisms, escapements, and automated devices were already well developed. The seismograph fits naturally into this tradition of practical mechanics. Skeptics sometimes argue that the historical accounts are exaggerated or symbolic, but the consistency of the records, combined with the absence of mystical language, suggests otherwise. The device is described as an administrative tool, not a wonder. Its success was measured by confirmation, not belief. From a human perspective, the Chinese seismograph is unsettling because it reveals how detection can precede understanding. Zhang Heng did not know about tectonic plates. He did not describe elastic rebound or wave propagation mathematically, and yet he built a device that responded correctly to seismic events. The instrument did not explain earthquakes. It listened to them. This distinction matters. Much of early science advanced by sensing patterns before explaining causes. The Chinese seismograph belongs to this tradition. It is a reminder that functional knowledge does not always wait for theory. Equally important is what the device represents socially. Its purpose was governance. By knowing where disaster struck, the court could respond faster, send aid, and maintain legitimacy. Detection was power. Information reduced uncertainty. Zhang Heng's seismograph stands as one of the clearest examples of ancient engineering solving a modern-sounding problem with pre-modern tools. It didn't measure shaking where it stood. It revealed shaking elsewhere. The ground moved far away. The dragon dropped a ball. And in that quiet mechanical gesture lay an early recognition that the world could be sensed beyond immediate human perception, proving that long before digital sensors and global networks, ancient minds were already building ways to detect the unseen, not through mystery, but through careful attention to how matter responds when the earth itself shifts beneath it. Andean polygonal stone joint precision. Across the highlands of the Andes, walls built from massive stone blocks stand with a quiet confidence that defies both time and expectation. These stones are not rectangular. They are not uniform. Instead, they are irregular, multi-angled, and interlocked with a precision that allows them to fit together so tightly that even thin blades cannot pass between joints. This technique, known as polygonal masonry, appears at sites such as Cusco, Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, and many others. Its existence raises a persistent question. How did Andean builders achieve such precision without metal tools, mortar, or written plans? The stones themselves provide the first clue. Each block is shaped to match its neighbors, often with concave and convex surfaces that lock together in 3 dimensions. This is not simple surface fitting. The contact points are distributed across the entire face of the stone, increasing stability and reducing stress. The result is a wall that can flex slightly during earthquakes without collapsing, a feature proven repeatedly in a seismically active region. This precision was not achieved by chance. Andean builders worked primarily with hard stone, including andesite, basalt, and limestone. These materials do not fracture easily. Shaping them requires patience, controlled force, and understanding of fracture behavior. Stonehammer tools, abrasives, and water were used to gradually remove material. This process was slow, but it allowed for extreme control. Rather than shaping stones in isolation, builders appear to have shaped them in relation to one another. A block was lifted, tested against its neighbors, marked, removed, and refined. This cycle was repeated many times until the fit was exact. The method favored incremental progress over speed. This approach requires coordination and memory. Large stones could weigh tens of tons. Moving them repeatedly would have been difficult. This implies careful planning of sequences, temporary supports, and skilled teams familiar with the process. The work was communal, not individual. Another important factor is the absence of mortar. Mortar simplifies construction by filling gaps and absorbing irregularities. By choosing not to use it, Andean builders committed themselves to precision. Every joint had to be correct. Errors could not be hidden. The choice to avoid mortar may have been both practical and symbolic. Mortar deteriorates over time, especially under seismic stress. Dry stone joints, by contrast, can settle and reseat themselves. Culturally, stone had spiritual significance in Andean belief. Shaping and joining stone was not merely technical work, but ritualized craftsmanship. Chronology adds complexity to the debate. Some polygonal masonry appears more refined in lower courses of walls, with later additions built using simpler techniques. This has led some researchers to suggest multiple construction phases, possibly spanning centuries. The Inca may have inherited, restored, or expanded upon earlier structures rather than originating the most refined examples. However, even later Inca work demonstrates remarkable skill. The difference may reflect functional choices rather than loss of knowledge. Modern experiments attempting to replicate polygonal joints using stone tools show that the technique is feasible, but extremely labor-intensive. Precision comes not from secret technology, but from time. This challenges modern assumptions that efficiency is always prioritized. In societies where labor was organized communally and time was measured differently, patience could substitute for machinery. The precision itself has sometimes fueled speculation about advanced lost technology, yet no evidence of such tools exist. No metal saws, no drilling machines, no chemical softening agents appear in the archaeological record. What does appear are stone tools, abrasives, and extensive quarry sites showing marks consistent with known methods. From a human perspective, Andean polygonal masonry is unsettling because it forces a reevaluation of skill. We often equate technological advancement with mechanical complexity. These walls demonstrate a different form of advancement, one based on tactile knowledge, repetition, and collective expertise. The builders understood stone not as an inert material, but as something that responded predictably to careful pressure. They learned its limits through practice rather than calculation. The polygonal walls of the Andes stand not as puzzles demanding extraordinary explanations, but as testaments to what human societies can achieve when knowledge is embedded in tradition rather than text. The joints remain sealed. The walls endure earthquakes. And in those silent stones lies a reminder that precision doesn't always arrive through innovation. Sometimes it arrives through persistence, shared memory, and the willingness to invest time where modern minds expect shortcuts, leaving behind structures that still outperform many later constructions, not because their builders possessed lost secrets, but because they mastered patience at a scale few societies have ever sustained. Roman cranes and lifting device engineering. Across the Roman world, enormous stone blocks were raised into place with a regularity that still prompts disbelief. Temple columns weighing dozens of tons, massive architraves lifted several stories high, and monolithic statues positioned with precision all point to a capability that seems, at first glance, out of reach for a society without steel cables, engines, or hydraulic systems. Yet the Romans achieved this not through hidden technology, but through a deep understanding of mechanics, organization, and repeatable method. Roman lifting devices were based on simple machines refined to extraordinary effect. The most important of these was the crane, built primarily from timber, rope, and iron fittings. At its core, the Roman crane relied on mechanical advantage, using pulleys, levers, and counterweights to multiply human force. One of the simplest Roman cranes used a single pulley, allowing a worker to lift a load equal to half its weight. More complex systems, such as the trispastos and pentaspastos, used 3 or 5 pulleys, dramatically increasing lifting power. With enough pulleys and coordinated labor, a small team could lift several tons. The most impressive Roman cranes employed treadwheel mechanisms. These large wooden wheels, sometimes over 4 meters in diameter, function like giant hamster wheels. Workers walking inside them used their body weight to turn the wheel, winding rope around a drum and lifting heavy loads smoothly and controllably. This design converted human mass into consistent rotational force. The effectiveness of these systems is not theoretical. Ancient sources, including the engineer Vitruvius, describe crane designs in clear, practical terms. Archaeological evidence, such as lifting holes in stone blocks and remnants of crane bases, confirms their widespread use. In some cases, marks left by rope friction are still visible on ancient masonry. What allowed Roman cranes to succeed was not just mechanical design, but planning. Lifting operations were choreographed events, Loads were prepared with carefully carved attachment points. Ropes were braided from hemp or flax, chosen for strength and flexibility. Timber was selected for specific properties, balancing rigidity with resilience. Safety mattered. Controlled lifting reduced the risk of catastrophic failure. Gradual movement, constant communication, and redundant supports were standard practice. These precautions are essential when lifting stone, regardless of era. One misconception is that Roman cranes could not lift the largest stone seen in imperial architecture. In reality, multiple cranes were often used together. By distributing load across several lifting points, engineers could raise enormous blocks incrementally. Scaffolding, ramps, and temporary supports worked alongside cranes as part of integrated construction systems. This modular approach allowed Romans to build at scale without single-point dependence. From a modern perspective, the absence of engines does not imply inefficiency. Human-powered systems, when well-designed, can be surprisingly effective. The Roman Empire had access to large labor pools, standardized training, and centralized oversight. These social factors amplified mechanical advantage. The cranes themselves were not exotic. They were built repeatedly, repaired, and improved. Their designs were taught and transmitted. Knowledge was not secret. It was procedural. This repeatability is crucial. Roman engineering excelled not because of isolated genius, but because solutions could be deployed across thousands of kilometers. From Britain to Syria, similar lifting techniques were used, adapted to local materials but consistent in principle. From a human perspective, Roman cranes challenge the assumption that heavy lifting requires modern power sources. They demonstrate how understanding force, friction, and balance can substitute for motors. The limits were real, but they were managed intelligently. There's no need to invoke lost machines or unknown energy sources. The evidence supports something more demanding: discipline, training, coordination, patience. As this chapter closes, Roman lifting devices stand as reminders that large-scale construction is as much about organization as it is about technology. The cranes did not defy physics. They obeyed it carefully. The ropes held, the wheels turned, the stones rose. And in that controlled movement lies a truth often overlooked, that even the heaviest achievements of the ancient world were built not by extraordinary tools, but by ordinary tools used with extraordinary understanding, proving that engineering success depends less on what powers a machine than on how well humans understand the forces they are trying to command. Shang Dynasty Oracle, Bone Engraving Tools. More than 3,000 years ago, during the Shang Dynasty of ancient China, a practice emerged that would permanently change the way history could speak for itself. Kings and diviners inscribed questions onto animal bones and turtle plastrons, heated them until they cracked, and interpreted the patterns as messages from ancestral spirits. These objects, known today as oracle bones, are not only the earliest known form of Chinese writing, but also physical records of how ancient craftsmen worked with extraordinary precision, using tools that appeared deceptively simple. The engravings on oracle bones are small, clean, and deliberate. Characters are cut with sharp definition, controlled depth, and consistent line quality. Many inscriptions are dense, containing dozens of symbols arranged in orderly sequences. This level of control immediately raises a technical question. What kind of tools could produce such fine carving on hard bone and shell without causing splintering or uneven cuts? The Shang did not have steel tools as we understand them today. Their metallurgy was dominated by bronze, an alloy well suited for casting weapons and ritual vessels, but less ideal for maintaining razor-sharp edges. Bone and turtle shell are unforgiving materials. They resist cutting, crack unpredictably, and dull tools quickly. Yet the inscriptions endure. Archaeological evidence suggests that Shang engravers used a combination of bronze blades, stone tools, and possibly hardened bone implements. These tools were not designed for speed. They were designed for control. Fine incising likely involved repeated shallow cuts rather than deep strokes, gradually shaping each line while minimizing stress on the material. Microscopic analysis of oracle bone inscriptions reveals consistent tool marks. The lines show uniform width and smooth edges, indicating stable hand pressure and predictable cutting angles. This suggests not only skilled hands, but standardized tools and techniques passed down through training. Preparation was critical. Before engraving, bones were cleaned, dried, and often polished. The surface was smooth to reduce resistance and guide the cutting edge. In many cases, guide marks were lightly scratched to lay out the text before final engraving began. This planning reduced error and ensured balanced composition. The act of engraving itself was slow and deliberate. Each character required careful attention, as mistakes could not be easily corrected. The bones were used in ritual contexts, often involving royal decisions about warfare, agriculture, weather, and succession. Accuracy mattered not just technically, but symbolically. The tools may have been simple, but the system was not. Shang workshops appear to have been specialized. Not everyone engraved oracle bones. This was a skilled role tied to religious authority and court administration. The consistency of inscriptions across different sites suggests that engravers followed shared conventions in stroke order, spacing, and character form. This implies institutional knowledge. One of the most striking aspects of oracle bone engraving is its durability. The inscriptions have survived thousands of years buried in soil, retaining legibility. This durability is not accidental. It reflects an understanding of how deep to cut, how to angle strokes, and how to avoid creating stress fractures that would weaken the bone over time. From a modern perspective, it is tempting to assume that such precision requires advanced materials. The Shang example demonstrates something different. Precision emerged from technique, not material superiority. A well-controlled bronze blade in trained hands can outperform a superior tool used carelessly. The engravers also adapted their tools to the task. Edges were resharpened frequently. Cutting angles were adjusted to follow the grain of the bone. Resistance was managed rather than fought. These decisions reflect intimate familiarity with the medium. From a human perspective, oracle bone engraving is unsettling because it compresses several assumptions into one object. Writing, metallurgy, ritual practice, and craftsmanship converge at a moment far earlier than many expect. These were not experimental scratches. They were confident inscriptions made within a mature system. The tools themselves may never be fully reconstructed. Bronze blades corrode. Stone tools blend into broader categories. But the marks they left are unambiguous. They tell us how the tools were used, even if the tools themselves are gone. The oracle bones of the Shang dynasty stand as evidence that technological capability cannot be judged by materials alone. The engravings show that early craftsmen achieved consistency, clarity, and permanence through methodical practice and institutional continuity. And in those carved lines lies a reminder that some of humanity's most enduring records were created not with advanced alloys or machines, but with patience, skill, and tools refined through repetition, leaving behind marks precise enough to carry voices from the dawn of recorded history into the present day. Ancient stone polishing and abrasion methods. Across the ancient world, stone surfaces exist that seem to contradict the tools believed to have created them. Granite sarcophagi in Egypt polished to a near-reflective sheen, basalt blocks in South America smoothed with uniform consistency, and hard stone statues from Asia and the Mediterranean finished with surfaces so even that modern observers often assume machine involvement. The mystery is not whether ancient people polished stone, but how they achieve such results using materials that appear inadequate by modern standards. Stone polishing begins with a basic reality. Hard stone cannot be cut cleanly through force alone. It must be worn down gradually. Ancient builders understood this not through theory, but through experience. Abrasion, not cutting, was the primary method. Instead of slicing stone, they allowed harder or equally hard particles to grind away material over time. The most important tools were not blades, but abrasives. Quartz sand, emery, crushed granite, corundum, and other mineral powders were used extensively. These materials are harder than limestone and comparable in hardness to granite. When mixed with water, they form slurries that could be applied repeatedly to stone surfaces. The abrasive particles did the work, while the human hand controlled pressure and direction. This process was slow. Large surfaces were polished in stages. First, rough shaping removed high points using hammerstones and chisels. Then progressively finer abrasives were introduced. Each stage removed the scratches left by the previous one. The final polish emerged not from a single action, but from thousands of repetitive passes. Water played a critical role. It reduced friction, carried away debris, and distributed abrasive particles evenly. Without water, heat, and uneven wear would damage both tool and stone. Ancient craftsmen understood this instinctively. The polishing tools themselves were simple but effective. Flat stone rubbers, wooden blocks, leather pads, and bone implements were used as carriers for abrasive slurries. These tools did not shape stone directly. They held the abrasive against the surface at controlled angles and pressure. This required skill. Maintaining a flat plane across a large surface demands constant attention. Uneven pressure creates dips. Excess force causes gouging. Polishing hard stone is unforgiving. Errors compound quickly. The consistency seen in ancient polished stones suggests not experimentation, but mastery. In Egypt, evidence of polishing methods survives in unfinished quarries and workshops. Tool marks show circular and linear abrasion patterns consistent with hand-driven polishing. Residues of quartz sand and other abrasives have been identified near work sites. No traces of rotary machines exist. None are required. South American stonework shows similar patterns. At sites like Pumapunku and Ollantaytambo, polished surfaces coexist with our visible abrasion marks where work was interrupted. These marks align with known manual polishing techniques, not machine tooling. One of the most misunderstood aspects of ancient stone polishing is time. Modern observers often underestimate how much labor ancient societies could invest in a single object. With large workforces, communal organization, and different economic priorities, time could be spent where modern projects demand speed. Polishing a granite surface over months or years was not impractical if the result carried religious, political, or symbolic importance. Another factor was specialization. Stone polishing was not casual labor. It was a skilled craft passed through apprenticeship. Craftsmen learned how different stones responded to pressure, which abrasives worked best, and how long each stage required. This knowledge was tactile, not written. Modern experiments confirm the feasibility of these methods. When researchers replicate ancient techniques using period-appropriate materials, polished surfaces comparable to ancient examples can be achieved. The limiting factor is not possibility, but patience. From a human perspective, ancient stone polishing challenges assumptions about efficiency and progress. We associate smoothness with machines because machines deliver it quickly. Ancient craftsmen delivered it slowly, but no less effectively. There's no missing technology in these stones. There's missing appreciation for labor. The polish itself becomes a record of time invested. Every smooth surface represents thousands of controlled movements, each one small, deliberate, and cumulative. The result looks effortless only because the effort is no longer visible. Ancient stone polishing stands as a reminder that sophistication does not always arrive through innovation. Sometimes it arrives through endurance, through repetition, through hands that learn how stone behaves under pressure and respond accordingly. The surface shines, the tools are gone. And in that contrast lies the true story, that long before electric grinders and diamond bits, human beings learned how to transform the hardest materials on Earth, using nothing more than mineral grit, water, and an understanding that perfection is not forced, but worn patiently into existence. The Franklin Expedition disappearance. In 1845, at the height of a British naval confidence, 2 ships left England carrying one of the most ambitious Arctic missions ever attempted. HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, commanded by Sir John Franklin, were sent to chart the final unknown section of the Northwest Passage, a sea route linking the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans through the Arctic. The expedition was well-funded, technologically advanced for its time, and crewed by experienced officers and sailors. It was expected to succeed. Instead, it vanished. The Franklin expedition entered Baffin Bay in the summer of 1845 and was last seen by European whalers waiting at the edge of the Arctic ice. After that, there were no letters, no signals, no confirmed sightings. The ships disappeared into a region where maps ended and assumptions replaced experience. For years, silence followed. At first, the British Admiralty assumed delay rather than disaster. The Arctic was slow, unforgiving, and unpredictable. Expeditions often overwintered, but as seasons passed with no word, concern turned to alarm. Search missions were launched, driven as much by national pride as by hope of rescue. What they found instead were fragments. Scattered across the Canadian Arctic were abandoned camps, broken equipment, and human remains. Inuit oral histories describe starving men dragging sledges across the ice, abandoning their ships, and dying along the way. These accounts were initially dismissed or ignored, but later evidence confirmed their accuracy. The ships themselves had become trapped in sea ice near King William Island. The ice did not simply surround them, it held them fast for years. During this time, the crew remained aboard, relying on stored provisions and discipline to survive Arctic winters darker and colder than anything most had experienced. But the provisions were flawed. The expedition carried thousands of tins of preserved food, a new technology at the time. Later analysis revealed that the cans were poorly sealed with lead solder. This allowed lead to leach into the food over time. Elevated lead levels found in crew remains suggest chronic poisoning, which would have impaired judgment, weakened bodies, and worsened susceptibility to illness. Cold was not the only enemy. Scurvy, malnutrition, and infection took hold as fresh food became scarce. Hunting opportunities were limited, and unfamiliarity with Inuit survival techniques left the crew dependent on failing systems. The Arctic punished rigidity. Adaptation was required, and adaptation came too late. At some point, after years trapped in ice, the decision was made to abandon the ships. This moment marks a turning point in the expedition's fate. The crew attempted to march south across hundreds of kilometers of frozen terrain, hauling boats and supplies on sledges. This decision reflected desperation rather than strategy. No European expedition had ever survived such a journey. Archaeological evidence suggests that some men died quickly, others struggled on. Cut marks on human bones indicate cannibalism in the final stages, a fact that shocked Victorian Britain when it was first suggested and fiercely denied. Today, it is accepted as tragic evidence of survival instincts overtaking social norms under extreme conditions. Sir John Franklin himself died before the final march began. Leadership passed to officers who were already weakened and burdened by impossible choices. Without ships, without resupply, and without local knowledge, the expedition unraveled. The Arctic did not strike suddenly. It wore them down. For more than a century, the fate of Erebus and Terror remained incomplete. Then, in the 21st century, the ships were finally found, preserved beneath cold Arctic waters. Their discovery confirmed Inuit accounts long ignored and closed one of the longest-running mysteries in exploration history. Yet even with the ships located, the disappearance of the Franklin expedition remains unsettling. This was not a reckless mission. It was carefully planned, technologically equipped, and led by experienced men. Its failure reveals the limits of confidence when faced with environments that do not forgive error. It also exposes the danger of assuming that technology can replace local knowledge. From a human perspective, the Franklin expedition is not a story of incompetence, but of misplaced certainty. The men trusted systems that failed quietly. They followed procedures that did not adapt. By the time reality forced change, strength and time were already gone. The Arctic did not need to attack, it only needed to wait. The Franklin expedition stands as a reminder that disappearance does not always come from mystery alone. Sometimes it comes from isolation, pride, and the slow accumulation of small failures in places where recovery is impossible. 2 ships entered the ice with maps and confidence. None returned. And in the frozen silence of the Arctic, the story they left behind continues to speak, not as a warning against exploration, but as a lesson in humility, showing how even the most advanced expeditions can vanish when preparation meets a world that refuses to bend.